The courtroom was supposed to be quiet that morning, just another routine hearing day. Lawyers whispered, pens clicked, and the slow shuffle of papers filled the air. But the moment Ethan Caldwell walked in, everything changed. He wasn't nervous like most people who stood before the bench. He wasn't humbled. He didn't even look around to understand where he was. Instead, he walked like the room belonged to him. Ethan was just 17, but he carried the arrogance of a king without a kingdom. Designer jacket, diamond-studded watch, expensive haircut. The type of styling that didn't say confidence, but rather, I've never been told no. His father was a well-known real estate tycoon, one of those names that opened doors and closed consequences. He didn't take a seat like everyone else. He leaned back in the last row, tapping his foot, scrolling his phone loudly, making sure everyone saw the luxury brand case, the rings, the smug half-smile. A couple of teens in the gallery whispered about him, but Ethan didn't whisper anything back. He spoke loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "Can we hurry this up? I've got places to be." The bailiff shot him a warning glare. Ethan ignored it. When his name was called, he didn't walk to the front. He strolled, dragging his feet, like a bored child forced to attend something beneath him. Standing before Judge Harris, Ethan didn't bow his head. He didn't show respect. He didn't even pretend. Judge Harris was a calm man. Gray hair, gentle voice, but the kind of presence that felt like truth itself. He spoke softly. "Please state your name." Ethan smirked, raised his chin, and said, "Do you even know who my father is?" The room froze, not a breath, not a whisper. Even the fluorescent light seemed to hum quieter. Judge Harris didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply observed the boy, really looked at him, the way a teacher looks at a student who has never learned the meaning of respect. And in that moment, something unspoken passed through the air. This would not be an ordinary hearing. This would not be a simple fine. This would become the lesson Ethan never expected, and the courtroom was about to witness a sentence that would be talked about for years. To understand how Ethan ended up in that courtroom, you have to know the world he came from. Ethan Caldwell had grown up surrounded by luxury, imported cars, gated estates, private schools with marble floors and glass elevators. He had drivers, assistants, tutors, and trainers. His birthday parties looked like music award shows. At home, if he didn't want to finish a task, someone finished it for him. If he made a mistake, money covered it. If he caused trouble, the school board apologized to him. Everyone around him had taught him one thing: consequences were for other people, never for him. So when he sped through a school zone at nearly twice the limit, nearly hitting a crossing guard, Ethan didn't think it was a serious issue. When the police officer stopped him, Ethan laughed in his face, calling him a mall security reject. It made the headlines, not because of the charge, but because it was recorded. And the video went viral. The whole city saw it. Parents were furious. Teachers were furious. The community was furious. But Ethan? He showed up to court like it was an inconvenience, something he'd shrug off just like every time before. Inside the courtroom, his father wasn't there. Not because he didn't care, but because he assumed his son didn't need him. He assumed the family name would do the work. He assumed Judge Harris would look at the file, see the wealth, and move on. But Judge Harris didn't see dollar signs. He saw something else entirely. As Ethan stood before the bench, the judge reviewed the police report, the dashcam footage, and the statement submitted. The crossing guard, a woman in her late 60s who had been directing traffic for over 2 decades, had written her experience. "He didn't just drive fast. He looked at me like I was invisible, like my life didn't matter." That line stayed with the judge. Judge Harris looked slowly around the courtroom that day. He saw the kids sitting with their parents, learning how the justice system worked. He saw the officer who had been insulted sitting quietly, not angry, just tired. He saw the crossing guard, hands folded, wearing a calm but heavy expression. The judge realized this wasn't about a speeding ticket. This was about what kind of man this boy was becoming. Ethan still didn't understand why the judge was quiet for so long. He whispered to his attorney loudly enough for others to hear, "Can he just give me the fine? I have a flight in 2 hours." It wasn't just disrespect. It was indifference. The kind that grows into something dangerous if left unchecked. Judge Harris slowly folded his hands and asked Ethan one simple question. "Do you believe other people's lives have value? Or only your own?" Ethan blinked, confused, offended, and unprepared for the first time. The room felt heavier than his last name. Ethan shifted his weight, confused at the judge's question. He was used to questions that had simple answers, numbers, dates, fines, signatures. But this question was aimed at who he was, not what he did. "What kind of question is that?" Ethan replied, almost laughing. Judge Harris didn't break eye contact. "It's a very important one," he answered. The courtroom listened. Everyone understood what the judge was asking, everyone except Ethan. "I mean, obviously people matter," Ethan muttered, rolling his eyes. "But this whole thing is being blown out of proportion. No one got hurt. Let's just handle it and move on." The judge nodded slowly as if he expected that answer. "Officer Daniels," he called. The officer who Ethan had mocked stepped forward. He didn't look triumphant or angry. He looked tired, like a man who had seen too many people treat the law as optional. "I'd like you to describe your interaction with Mr. Caldwell," Judge Harris requested. Officer Daniels spoke calmly. "When I approached the vehicle, Mr. Caldwell laughed at me. He said I looked like I failed at life. He said I should be grateful to speak to him. I was only trying to explain the danger he caused. Children were crossing at that moment." A few gasps rippled through the room. Ethan shrugged. "I was just joking." The officer turned to him. No anger, just disappointment. "Son, we joke with people, not at people." The courtroom went silent. The judge then gestured to the crossing guard, Mrs. Palmer. She stood, slow but steady. A woman small in frame but strong in presence. "I've been helping children cross streets for 23 years, she began, voice soft. "I've seen many careless drivers, but it was the look in your eyes that shook me. Not your driving, not your speed. The way you looked right through me, like my life, my job, my years, meant nothing." Ethan swallowed. For the first time, his expression changed. Not much, just a flicker. Judge Harris leaned forward. "That look," he said gently, "is what we are addressing today." Ethan's attorney tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand, not angrily, just firmly. "I am not here to punish you for speeding," Judge Harris continued. "I am here because if this attitude continues, one day someone will get hurt. And it won't be an accident. It will be the result of neglect born from entitlement." The room felt heavier. Even Ethan felt it for the first time. He didn't have a comeback. Judge Harris spoke again, voice steady. "I cannot teach you empathy with a fine. I cannot teach you respect with a lecture. I cannot change your values with punishment." He paused. "But I can offer you an experience that may show you what you have not yet learned." Ethan finally understood something. This was no ordinary hearing. This judge wasn't trying to break him, he was trying to wake him up. Judge Harris took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to echo. Ethan stood still, no longer smirking, no longer leaning back with arrogance. For the first time he looked uncertain, almost exposed. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge began, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. "You are at an age where your character is still being shaped. Today is not just about what you did. It is about who you are becoming." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt this time. The judge looked to the crossing guard, Mrs. Palmer, then to Officer Daniels, and finally, back at Ethan. "The court has reviewed your driving record and the statements put forth. You have been given warnings before. You have been given leniency before. Yet each time the behavior escalated." A soft murmur moved through the gallery. Ethan stared at the floor. "It would be easy," Judge Harris continued, "to assign you a fine you would pay without thought, a fine that would teach you nothing." The judge leaned forward. "And that, Mr. Caldwell, is the very problem." Ethan's attorney stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," Judge Harris said gently without raising his voice. "This moment is between the court and the young man who stands before it." The attorney stepped back. The judge folded his hands. "Mr. Caldwell, I am assigning you a sentence unlike any fine or detention you've ever received." The courtroom collectively inhaled. "You will spend the next 8 Saturdays volunteering at the Jefferson Saw Community Rehabilitation Center." Ethan blinked. "Community what?" The judge continued. "This center serves individuals who have suffered permanent physical injuries due to reckless driving. Some can no longer walk, some lost family members. Some are learning to speak again. These are not statistics. These are lives permanently altered. Ethan's face lost color. You will work with their physical therapy staff, Judge Harris went on. You will help them move, stretch, learn to hold utensils, to lift their arms, to relearn what you take for granted. People in the gallery exchanged stunned glances. This is not punishment, the judge said. This is perspective. Ethan finally spoke, voice unsteady. But why me? I didn't hurt anyone. Judge Harris didn't hesitate, and that is exactly why you must go. Before you do. The room went still. No one breathed. The judge finished softly. You do not yet understand the value of a life. But you will. Not because I tell you, but because you will look into the eyes of someone whose life was changed by someone who thought consequences only applied to others. Ethan didn't have a response, and for the first time in his young life, he felt the weight of who he was becoming. The judge's words hung in the air like a bell that had been struck but had not yet stopped ringing. Ethan stood frozen, his expression no longer defiant, just stunned. The courtroom around him seemed to shift. The world he thought he understood suddenly felt unfamiliar. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered urgently, "Say something. Request leniency. We can appeal this." But Ethan didn't speak. For the first time that day. He had no words. His gaze drifted toward Mrs. Palmer, the crossing guard. She was not triumphant. She was not smug. She simply looked tired and hopeful. It was the look of someone who had seen too much pain to celebrate another person being humbled. Then his eyes met Officer Daniels, the same officer he had mocked, laughed at, and belittled. But now the officer's expression wasn't stern. It was sad, the kind of sadness someone feels for a person who is lost and doesn't know. Ethan looked away. The judge's voice broke the silence. "Young man, your sentence begins this Saturday at 9 a.m. I expect punctuality and presence, not performance." Ethan nodded once, almost too quietly to notice. "Yes, Your Honor." The moment he said it, gasps rippled faintly across the courtroom. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. It was the first time Ethan had spoken without arrogance. The bailiff signaled for the room to proceed with the next case, but no one moved at first. People were still absorbing what they had witnessed. A wealthy teenager who had walked in with invincibility, now realizing how fragile that illusion had been. As Ethan stepped away from the bench, he saw his reflection in the polished wood of the courtroom rail. But it didn't look like the boy who arrived that morning. It looked like someone who had seen a part of himself he didn't recognize and didn't like. His footsteps were slow as he walked down the aisle. Not dragging in boredom this time, but heavy, weighted with something new. Understanding. When he reached the double doors, his phone buzzed. Dozens of messages, social media notifications, people laughing, taking sides, debating him. His friends texting, "Bro, just apologize and pay them off." "Judge can't do that, right? LMAO, you'll be done by lunch." He stared at the screen. Something inside him shifted. He locked the phone and placed it in his pocket. Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray. The air felt colder than it had that morning. He stood on the steps for a long moment, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to think for the first time in his life. He felt small, not because someone made him small, but because he realized he had never grown, and Saturday, the first day of his sentence, was coming fast. Day that was going to change everything. Saturday arrived faster than Ethan expected. He stood outside the Jefferson Community Rehabilitation Center, hands deep in his pockets, shoulders tense. The building wasn't large or impressive. No marble, no glass, just brick walls and a faded sign. A place most people would never think about unless they needed it. He hesitated before going in. Inside, a therapist greeted him. "Ethan Caldwell, you're here for volunteer support." Her voice wasn't judgmental. It was matter-of-fact. "Yes," he answered quietly. She handed him a visitor badge. No phones. No excuses. And most importantly, no ego. "Understand?" Ethan nodded. The therapist led him into the rehabilitation room. And that's where everything changed. There were people of all ages, some young, some in wheelchairs, some with braces on their legs, some struggling to move their hands. In front of them were therapists guiding slow, painful exercises. The room was quiet except for deep breaths and the occasional wince of discomfort. Then Ethan saw him, A boy, no older than 15, struggling to lift his arm. His left side was stiff, unresponsive. The therapist explained, "He was hit by a speeding driver last year. Driver never even looked back." Ethan felt something catch in his chest. The therapist turned to him. "Help him lift his arm. Slowly. Gently." Ethan swallowed and placed his hand beneath the boy's elbow. The boy tried to lift his arm again. His face tightened. Tears formed, not from the pain but from the frustration. "I used to play violin," the boy whispered. "Now I can't even tie my shoes." Ethan froze. He didn't say "I'm sorry." He didn't know how. He just held the boy's arm steady as the therapist guided the motion, for the first time in his life. Ethan wasn't the one being served. He was the one serving. Hours passed. He helped hold water cups. He helped gather equipment. He listened. Not one person in that room knew his last name or cared. To them, he wasn't a rich kid. He was just a pair of hands trying to do something right. On his third Saturday, he found Mrs. Palmer, the crossing guard, waiting outside. She hadn't come for recognition. She had simply come to check if he was truly showing up. Ethan walked toward her slowly. "I didn't understand," he said, voice low. "I didn't." "See people?" "Not really." Mrs. Palmer placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Seeing others," she said softly, "is where maturity begins." Those words broke something open inside him. Week after week, Ethan worked, and the work didn't make him feel small. It made him feel human. He stopped comparing, stopped performing, stopped pretending. He began listening. He began helping. He began caring. And for the first time in his life, he began to understand the value of a life that wasn't his own. 8 Saturdays passed. Not quickly, not easily, but with a quiet heaviness that changed Ethan in ways no courtroom lecture ever could. On the final day, Ethan didn't check the time. He didn't wait for the hours to pass. He stayed even after his shift ended, helping clean equipment and fold therapy towels. When the therapist told him he could go, he paused. He looked around the room. The boy who once struggled to lift his arm now managed to raise it shoulder high, determined, jaw clenched, sweat on his forehead. A woman in her 20s who had arrived in a wheelchair weeks earlier now stood with support bars, taking slow steps that felt like thunder. A father who had lost mobility in his right hand could now hold his child's fingers again. Every one of these victories came from painful, patient work, the kind of work Ethan had never respected before. He felt something shift inside his chest. Not guilt, not shame, but understanding. As he walked outside, Mrs. Palmer, the crossing guard, was waiting again. She didn't say a word. She simply smiled, warm and steady. Ethan stepped forward and hugged her gently. This time it wasn't the hug of someone seeking forgiveness. It was gratitude. Later that week, Ethan returned to court for his final review. The gallery was full again. Parents, students, strangers who had followed the case. Ethan stood before Judge Harris, but this time his posture was different. He wasn't leaning back. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't looking around to see who was watching. He stood still. Judge Harris peered at him over his glasses. "How do you see the world now, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan thought carefully before answering, not to impress, but to speak truth. "I used to think respect was something people owed me," he said slowly. "But now I understand it's something I have to give. And life isn't about having power. It's about having empathy." The courtroom felt the sincerity in his voice. Judge Harris nodded. "The purpose of justice," he said, "is not always to punish. Sometimes it is to wake us up." He dismissed the case, not because Ethan was wealthy, but because Ethan had changed. As Ethan walked out of the courtroom for the last time, there was no attention, no spotlight, no applause. Just a young man taking responsibility for the first time, and sometimes that is the greatest victory of all. Moral of the story: respect isn't about what we wear, what we drive, or how much we own. It's shown in how we treat others, especially those the world overlooks. We don't grow when life is easy. We grow when life teaches us how to see others clearly. True strength is humility. True maturity is empathy. True power is kindness. Call to action. If you believe humility is real strength, type respect in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to thank you personally.